Welcome to our webinar. My name is Anna Pogreb. I am Senior Risk Strategist at EverC, part of the industry knowledge team. I'm working closely with one of our products, which is called MarketView. It's a product that does risk classification for listings on marketplaces. And I'm so happy to have with me today Travis Dawson from StockX. Let's introduce you for the people who's gonna watch our webinar. You are a senior product director for StockX, right?
Yep.
Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself? Because it seems that you've went in a pretty long and interesting way to where you are now, because you are a product person that has patents and published articles about DDoS attack and botnets. You do a lot of speaking engagements, you do podcasts, you do webinars like this one. Thank you for joining us. So can you tell us about yourself a little bit and how you ended up in StockX?
The way I try to describe it is I used to be smart and I have paperwork to prove it. So I started off actually as a network engineer, moved into network security, ended up at Sprint as a principal member of technical staff for almost a decade, 8 years plus. And worked on everything from the tier one backbone to wireless networks. Built some of the first fraud models for telcos and filed a 20-some patents at Sprint. And I was a geek. I was an engineer. So I was smart. I honest I was.
You still are.
Well, I like to convince myself of that, but then I moved to Boeing, actually Norris, which was a wholly owned subsidiary of Boeing, and became a product manager. Filed a couple more patents on denial of service and a few other things, but really just went right into product management at that point. Uh, Bounced around a couple startups, ended up at StubHub, and really focused on marketplaces after that. So my forte has always been fraud, payments, and really anything that's not very sexy. So uh, I've really kind of accumulated all of the orphan children, I guess you can call them. Now I'm at StockX, which is an online marketplace for current culture. You know, the stuff you see behind us is the stuff that we have on our marketplace. And I'm responsible for everything that's not sexy. So fraud, payments, as well as core marketplace, basically how the whole thing runs,
Mm-hmm.
customer service, finance, accounting, taxes, duties, you name it, compliance, all the fun stuff. But it gives me a very unique perspective on how e-commerce and marketplaces work, and it also requires me to keep up on a whole lot of things in order to do my job, which I find very much fun. So yeah, it's good to come into work every day and having to learn something new.
Good. So let's talk about marketplaces. We wanted to talk about risks and the changes in the industry around all the risks that marketplaces are involved in. And what I'm seeing right now is actually more or less change in the external pressure on the marketplaces, because the risks were always there. But for a pretty long time, the regulators and the industry and basically everybody, they just left marketplaces alone. You take care of the buyers, you worry about your own chargebacks, you make sure that the sellers are getting paid on time if you decided to pay them. and nobody, like all the rest, in best case scenario from what I was seeing, it was outsourced maybe to other companies, that and marketplaces did not worry about it. But lately it seems that they starting, ganging up and making marketplaces monitor more, share information more with government, with brands, with so what do you see there? How do you see it from the
Well,
marketplace perspective?
marketplaces were casually ignored. It's marketplaces were treated like e-commerce companies, which means that the buy side was the only thing important. The sell side just did not exist. We didn't have laws, regulations, or really anything
But Article
for them.
230 actually was kind of
Art,
happily
but
employed by marketplaces, like, we're a platform, it doesn't really refer to us, but we're still gonna use
we
it.
shoehorned ourselves into that one. We shoehorned ourselves into that one. It's not meant for us, but we shoehorned ourselves into that one. And marketplaces are really good at shoehorning, things in because we don't have anything of our own. Marketplaces, up until the last, I would say, 3, 4 years, did not have any real regulations or any real rules that were specifically for marketplaces. Everything was e-commerce or content creators, social media companies, things like
Hmm.
that. And we've actually defined seller listings as content. That's how far down the rabbit hole we went. So we we really were ignored. Um, and a couple funny things happened during the pandemic, and that is that one is organized rings found that marketplaces were a good way to make money.
Hmm.
So organized crime got involved in marketplaces and absolutely tore several marketplaces up, and use them as their own little playgrounds. As a result, a lot of buyers got hurt. Now, remember, buyers is really what the regulations are around. So
Hmm.
once buyers started getting hurt and getting hurt a lot, then we started seeing the government step in. Now, this is they're clumsy at best. The government is always clumsy at best, at least in their first iterations. But they have taken a two-pronged approach to this.
Hmm.
The first was through money, and that is you got the DAC 7 and the IRS rules that came in and said, we need to better track your sellers, better identify your sellers, and we also want our cut. They're basically
Hmm.
pure money grabs from governments, but it does identify the sellers, which
Hmm.
is part of their what their point was. And so we have that, which forced us to start
Inform Act
identifying.
is also about
Inform Act
sellers. Yeah.
is about sellers, but with a buyer twist. It's basically aimed at allowing buyers to see who the seller is
Hmm.
and to start identifying it. So it's kind of a middle ground. And then you start having the big ones on the other side of the fence, which is the ShopSafe Act and DSA, which specifically are marketplaces, specifically are for counterfeits and bad user experiences, and are specifically aimed at marketplaces' obligations to not sell counterfeit goods and to keep their sellers in line. And they don't have a whole lot of teeth yet. There's a lot of recommendations, a whole lot of hand waving on it, but you see where it's going. The governments have figured out that marketplaces exist and they're not just standard e-commerce companies anymore. And as a result, they are being treated separately and uniquely, which really they should have been done all along. But we're now starting to see, for better or worse, I'm going to say not non-preferential treatment or preferential treatment, whichever way you want to see it, for marketplaces from governments. And it's good and bad.
Hmm.
Um,
That was
it's
my next question. How do you feel about it?
it's good and bad. I applaud that that the governments are stepping in and doing something about counterfeits and doing something about marketplaces that abuse the buyers. They're just scams. They're just taking advantage of them. And even if they're not purposely doing it, they're allowing it to happen, and it gives all marketplaces a bad name. So the fact that these things are now have some force of law and can be removed is a good thing. That being said, the regulations that are coming out are, as I said, clumsy at best. The Inform Act requires you to verify a seller's name, address, phone number, things like that,
And not all
based
of
on
them,
certain,
but the
oh, yeah,
big ones.
the big ones. If they pass the high velocity sellers, if they pass a certain threshold, you have to do all this. They never really defined what they mean by verify. They said local database, which is like my local database or someone else's local database. Who's because of course I can look in my local database and verify that it's there, but that's not really useful. So you get they're still working out certain things. They don't know really how marketplaces work,
Hmm.
but they're starting to write laws for it, which is fun to watch. But so I'm hoping that they clarify a few things over the next year or two as the
Hmm.
Inform Act is attempted to be enforced. And you also have some of the other laws that are still a little clumsy, but the Inform Act is by far the most vague for no good reason.
Well,
Uh,
it's just the way regulators do it usually. They never tell you exactly what you need to do, because you have to employ the risk-based approach. You need to talk to them. You need to, arrive to some decision that make sense to your business at
yeah.
the end of the day, I guess.
Yeah, well, that's good. I still would like it written out. We have talked to the FTC and a few others, and they're just as confused as we are on some of the language, and they're the ones enforcing it. So the first few enforcement actions, which will probably be coming this year, late this year or early
Hmm.
next year, will be interesting to see how they're treated,
Hmm.
how the cases go.
Interesting that you said that they are like they are protecting buyers, but at the same time they are concentrating on the sellers. So from my perspective, actually the focus is moving to sellers on the marketplaces. It was never such a big focus as now. So if we're talking about sellers and bad things they can do on marketplaces, okay, in terms of defrauding buyers, good. We have fake listings, fake in terms of they never intended to sell anything. They just took the money and disappeared. We have counterfeits that you mentioned. We have bait and switch. We have misleading, right? We have sellers that are defrauding other sellers. For example, we have ATOs copying the content. These types of fraud, in my opinion, this is something at least you have somebody who can report it to you, right?
Yep.
If they're defrauding buyers, then buyers can leave reviews, they can contact, they can send messages through specialized system that you employ as part of the Inform Act and all the other things. Other sellers can report, but vendors can report as well in terms of counterfeit. I have to mention it. We're a vendor that reporting counterfeits to some of the marketplaces, for example. But how about fraud where you don't have anybody to report? When everything runs completely smoothly, all the transactions are coming through, mostly because buyer and seller is basically either working together or it's just the same entity.
Yep.
Buyer-seller collusion is something that is not being talked about a lot for some reason.
Uh,
So I
Probably
wanted to
because it's
ask,
not easily found. Just being honest. A unique aspect of marketplace is the ability for collusion fraud.
Mhm,
And before organized rings got involved, it was relatively simplistic. It was the same person or a couple of people that knew each other, um, trading between themselves, and it was not easy to find, but it wasn't extraordinarily difficult. You look for trading patterns and
mhm.
you see, these two people, these two accounts are trading between each other more than they should, especially in an anonymous marketplace. You shouldn't be trading with the same people over and over again. It's extraordinarily rare. You look
How
for
much
trade.
how much damage were it making before the organized crime? Was it a big part of the fraud?
No, no, over
Thought so.
fraud, it was a single digit percentages. It wasn't nothing fun. Nothing really got through. If you were targeted by a ring, all of a sudden could become problematic.
Mhm.
50, 100,000 could walk out the door in a day. And if not more. So it's the organization that made it where it was profitable. You got some marketplaces where their overall markup could be as low as 25, 30%. So you lose 25, 30% of the value of a dollar when you use the marketplace, which is in some cases, many cases, better than money laundering rates. So they would use a marketplace to launder money. And it's it worked. It worked actually pretty well for a lot of marketplaces, especially those that do not authenticate the goods. In other words,
Mhm.
where it goes direct from seller to buyer.
Or they offer services because there are services marketplaces as well, right?
Yep. And these this made it where marketplaces were put in a really weird situation. One is, why do we care? We're collecting our fees. You can do whatever you want. Um, and the other side was, it's only a matter of time before regulations come in. We already have some with, some money laundering AML regulations that we have to follow because
Hmm.
we pay out the sellers. But these are relatively weak. The current KYC AML laws are to make sure that the person's not on the money laundering list, and certain transactions, which are published,
Hmm.
have to be reported with a suspicious activity report, an SAR.
Mm. I didn't know that marketplaces have to file SARs as well.
We don't have to, we should.
Okay.
There's a difference. And the people doing money laundering know where these numbers are, and they know what marketplaces actually do file them and what
Mhm.
don't, and they steer clear of them. So right now we're in a weird situation where money laundering, as a marketplace, you don't have to do much, but you should do more. And the regulations are going to come down sooner rather than later to require marketplaces to exhibit a level of scrutiny on certain transactions that banks do. And
Mhm.
it's going to come in the form of money laundering and collusion fraud. So I see that coming in the next couple years. Don't bet on it. My prediction capability has been iffy lately, but it's gonna happen. And right now, the tools for it are not the greatest. There are several tools out there that work pretty well at it,
Mhm.
but when up against organized rings, a lot of them do not perform as well as I would say without the rings involved, when it's just simple collusion fraud.
For a second, let's imagine that we have, as one of our listeners and watchers, some people from marketplaces that didn't care about collusion fraud before. Can you maybe explain to them from a marketplace perspective? Because I can, for example, I can talk about it as someone who used to work in the payments industry, but payments industry has a bit of a limited view on the collusion on marketplaces. So maybe you can just describe how this thing works and what we actually mean when we say buyer-seller collusion.
Well, there's the simple version, which is that a seller posts a listing for an item. I'm going to use a pair of sneakers because it's what I know. So a pair of sneakers gets put on the site for, let's call it $200.
Okay.
And then they go create a buyer account and they buy their sneakers for $200 using a stolen credit card.
Okay.
Now, they basically bought their own stuff using a stolen credit card for $200. So they basically turned a stolen credit card into cash because we will then pay out the seller. And if they keep doing this, that we will end up giving that seller a 1099, which that's where the money laundering comes in, which is that cash is now clean according to the IRS. They can actually buy a house with that cash. So the collusion part is the first item, and it's how you turn bad money into good. And as you get more complex, you get where two people know each other. One's buyer, one's a seller, and they will exchange a product back and forth. Now,
And
if
it
you don't
can also be a stolen product to begin with.
stolen product to begin with, or my personal favorite, when we were working at StubHub, we had direct buyer to seller shipping or seller to buyer shipping. We expected it to be a ticket. Instead, it was an empty envelope. They never actually had the product. So if you don't do authentication or you don't, touch the product in the middle, they could literally be sending an empty box.
Or something that you don't want them to be sending because that by itself is also illegal.
Oh, wasn't going to bring that up, but we've had illicit substances sent with our labels. That's fun. Explain that one to alcohol, tobacco, and firearms that we've had shipped. It's why are you shipping this? I don't know either. So it's all so then when you get into organized, you now have dozens or hundreds of accounts on each side, shipping between each other somewhat randomly. And it becomes extraordinarily hard to pinpoint what's going on. But the point is that the buy side and the sell side are related. They know each other, and they're working together. And it is a effective means of turning bad money or illicit money into good money. But for the marketplace, they're just taking their fees. So why do they care? Well, because these people tend to artificially drive up prices because they know they don't really care what the price is. So you will see items that skyrocket, double, triple in price or more. At StubHub, we found that Hamilton tickets for the play Hamilton in Broadway all of a sudden increased by an average of 10 to 15%. Because we had a couple rings targeting Hamilton tickets that drove the overall price up. And if you know how big Hamilton was, they had to do a lot in order to drive up the ticket price 10 to 15%. So when we shut that down, all of a sudden you see the entire price, collapsing. So from a marketplace, there is more than just it's the right thing to do. It's actually impacting your overall prices, and it's actually impacting the market as a whole for your buyers and sellers. It's really screwing with the prices and in a way that is not easily recoverable afterwards.
I never thought about it from this perspective, from the price gouging,
Yeah.
right? There is actually also could be a direct hit on the marketplace if, as you mentioned, they're using stolen credit cards. You can get hit with all the chargebacks from all the people who never intended, unfortunately, to buy the
Oh, yeah.
sneakers for
Yeah,
$200. So,
the chargebacks is usually the first thing the marketplace sees, and then you work backwards from there and find the collusion. So you usually don't find until we developed our own internal tools for it, we were finding collusion about half the time, if not more, through chargebacks
mhm,
that, and then working the case backwards found it. Now we do both analysis of buyer and seller. In other words, basically trade dynamics to see if there's too many people, two accounts or multiple accounts are trading too much between each other.
mhm,
And two is price analysis to see if any prices are moving in ways that we didn't expect. Most
mhm,
of the time when they find a product or something that they target, they will drive the price up. So anything that's a standard deviation above where we expect it to be is now flagged, and we have an analyst look at it. And if it's above a standard deviation or more, there's a very good chance it's either collusion fraud or someone really screwed up on the pricing.
As I said, I didn't think about price gouging, so I think it is a very elegant solution to detect things like that, because I was thinking of, from my perspective, what information would be needed in order to detect something like this. So from how I see it, it's seller's data, right? You need to know seller registration details, IP, devices, something, and then during the monitoring while they are transacting, you usually, as far as I know, marketplaces have a pretty good access to this data because KYC, KYB, and you monitor your sellers. On that level, you're gonna need to see sellers' financial information, banking details. That's something that you're not always exposed to, because in many cases you outsource, so you might have some understanding of
Yep.
maybe like what payment processor, payment provider, PayFac does it, but where the money ends, you wouldn't necessarily know, right?
No, no, it's very opaque. We get as much as we can, and we try to see if there's any overlap in data between the buyer and the seller,
And
or
there's
if
usually not a lot of information about buyer because they don't go through such a rigorous verification when they register, if they even register. So you wouldn't have their legal name or any name. Um,
nope.
so
So you have to rely on we rely a lot on SDKs that give device IDs and
mhm.
device fingerprinting in order to see, oh, this device has 200 accounts. Well, that's weird. Let's start looking at what they're doing, and invariably, if we find a device fingerprint that becomes common, any more than 10 plus accounts, invariably they're usually suspended within a very short period of time after we find the device fingerprint becoming common.
Regardless if it's on the buyer side or on the seller sides, obviously if it's on both sides, then it's pretty
Oh,
clear.
it's there are if they're using the same device for multiple accounts, there are some legit use cases for that, and we account for that. But all the rest, if we if we don't bless it, it's gone. It's that simple. The probability of someone doing either collusion or money laundering after we see a device ID that has dozens of accounts behind it is somewhere near 100%. So we it's something we watch very closely. And not many people are buying our goods off of a public computer in the library. So, if unless it's a public computer in a library, we shouldn't expect to see so many accounts on the same device.
Right. That covers stupid fraudsters, right?
I
With
I never underestimate the stupidity of the person you're against. So never, no, no. So it still happens all the time.
true, but there are ones that are clever
Oh yeah,
and
yeah.
they they harder to catch and
We've found several rings that have resources behind them, and every single device ID was different. Every single one was different. Those are what's now appearing, and much harder, much harder, not only to detect but to keep off of your platform. Um, we are changing to where we are now starting to do additional KYC on the sell side
hmm
in order to prevent duplicate accounts,
hmm
so that once we burn an account, all of the related accounts are now up for elimination as well.
hmm
And if we see you trying to create multiple accounts, especially synthetics, we are becoming more not only aware of it, but we are a lot more sensitive to it.
Okay.
So we used to tolerate it to some degree. Our level of patience has worn thin.
Um, so how, like, what would you recommend to marketplaces that, as we just established, never really cared about, never really thought about it, or saw it here and there on the chargebacks, but never explored it? How to approach this? Because you just said that this is very hard to detect. You seem to employ a lot of different tools. Um, Not everyone maybe has this opportunity, but maybe they, I don't know, vendors write
Uh,
something by themselves,
vendors
build
are getting
versus.
there. Vendors are getting there. Not many products exist for marketplaces, and specifically not many on the sell side. So, but vendors are now building these products, and actually they're starting to become better, in many cases good. I'm not known for being nice to vendors, but there's a few things. One is performing additional KYC on sellers. I'm not saying full KYC, but just verification, even the bare minimum, in order to get rid of duplicate and the most basic of synthetic accounts. With Gen AI and a few other things, synthetic accounts are now a problem again. So try to get rid of, try to do some verification on the sell side to get rid of them. The rest is actually starting to pay attention to collusion. In other words, when a buy side and sell side match information, that's a problem. You
Mhm,
should be investigating that. And usually when you actually assign one or two people as investigators, when they start pulling the string, it's usually not just the two accounts that go. It's 10, 20, 30 accounts go every single time we do an investigation. So looking for that, but also start to build the muscle. You're not going to have all the tools on day one. No one expects you to, but understand that you need them and start, building them up slowly. The pricing analysis that we do, that did not happen on Thursday. That took a while to build, but it is now rather effective. Same thing with the basic collusion tools, that the dashboards and tools that we have. It took a little while to start building in those rules one by one by one, but now it's pretty effective. I mean, I'm never happy with it. If I'm ever happy with something, check my pulse. It means I died. But I'm satisfied with the progress. Um, and lastly is talk to your vendors. Sometimes you'd be surprised. Also talk to vendors that seem to be going in the right direction. Um, Marketplaces are always kind of overlooked. So we have found vendors that were doing content analysis for actually putting comments on web pages. We
Mhm.
found a couple of them to be pretty good at detecting fraud on the sell side from seller listing fraud. So work with your vendors, talk to these vendors, go to the conferences and just walk the expos and you'll get ideas and you'll get an understanding of not only what the problem is, but how you might be able to solve it. And then the key part here is vendors aren't fire and forget. You have to work with them. You have to sit with them. I sit with all my vendors, or at least the ones I like, kind of, at least weekly. And we go over what's working, what's not working, what we'd like. Some vendors initially find this annoying, but overall, we help them build a better product and we get a better product out of it. So as you're building these items, as you're looking at vendors, remember this is a marathon, not a sprint. Work with your vendors, work with your teams, build slow progress and continue at it. It's, I like saying that, fraud, especially in the marketplace arena, fraud is the one industry where if you're standing still, you're moving behind. You have to be moving forward at all times just to maintain status quo because they're moving, the
Very,
fraudsters are
very
moving,
fast.
and they move a lot faster because they don't have to check with legal before they release something. So they can move very fast. The way they've jumped on Gen AI to make synthetic accounts and deep fakes is a testament to how quickly they can adopt a new technology, way faster than we can. So it's there is no silver bullet. Build slowly, continue to build on top of it, find vendors that can help and work with them to improve the product. Ask them, if I give you more data, what can you give me? If I help you with this, if I give you my entire click stream, what can how can I help you? How can I make your product better so it works better for me? And you will be surprised how many vendors, one, will be surprised as heck because not many people do that with them, but two, how quickly they improve.
I
Um,
can I can attest to this as a representative of a vendor here, and one of those that actually you mentioned, right? One of our products is we're looking at the listings level risk.
yep,
So we do identify, and it could be used for different things, right? To identify counterfeits, to identify illicit products, but it can also be used for just identifying risky products, looking at these sellers more closely, as you mentioned, and go from there.
yeah. I mean, we found tools like yours that were looking at content for the content moderation that they were able to pick up some forms of collusion fraud because they were
Mhm.
like, this person always lists something that this other person picks up. That's a little weird. And it's like, well, no, that's not weird. That's collusion fraud. You just didn't know what it was. But now that we're helping you, that's collusion fraud. Congratulations, you found something new. And you'd be surprised how many vendors we've worked with that they found whole new sets of fraud that they thought was an error.
Mhm.
They thought it was, oh, your site's messing up because it's doing this. It's like, that's not our site. That is a bad person. We will take care of that. Make sure to alert on that from now on. Do not suppress that alert. So there's been a lot of those conversations. And as the tools mature and as more people like yourself and others start actively understanding that marketplaces exist and that these tools need to be built, we will have hopefully fewer of those, hey, is this a bug? Nope, nope, that's fraud. That's fraud. And more conversations like, hey, we're finding this nefarious activity that, we went back in our records and found this over the last 6 months, and here's an organized ring for you that you might want to take care of. It's getting better.
I really like the idea of talking to your vendors because in some cases, actually, the people who are buying the services of the vendors, they think that they know everything about their business, which is true, but still sometimes vendors can bring some insights,
I've been doing this for 20 years. I'm still surprised by what people will do. It it keeps me young. Every month there's something that causes me to go, well, that's new, and it makes the job fun. Um, but yeah, it's you have to talk to your vendors and you have to make sure that you're both on the same page and working together. Otherwise, you're not going to improve, and they're not going to improve. And as I said, you're
The
not moving.
regulators will be after you.
Yeah.
I think it's a very good place to stop on this, positive note. Half positive, but it's a good suggestion. Anything else you want to add, ask, anything?
Uh, no, I just want to say that thank you for having me. This is always fun to talk about these things, and I love telling vendors they should be building products for marketplaces. It's one of my most fun things to do because frankly they don't exist, and any vendor that's actually moving into that space is actually very happy for me to see. So keep up the good work.
I am completely honest that it is a huge pleasure talking to you. So I will definitely, whenever I will see you at any conference, I will definitely approach you.
Well, yeah, as I said, there's like 3 or 4 scheduled for this year, so it shouldn't be hard to find me.